So the choice to walk away kind of impacts the level of burnout that you'll experience, because when you're affected by a cause, especially in a visible way, it's really, really hard to separate yourself from the advocacy work that you're doing. I can't turn off the fact that, I'm a Muslim woman or that I'm racialized when I walk away from an advocacy event or initiative or meeting.
At Queen's, we know that for a culture shift to happen, everyone, students, staff, and faculty, will have to play a role. On this Continuum episode, we talk to student activists about their experiences advocating for change, myths and misconceptions about engaging in allyship, and how to overcome some of the obstacles associated with equity work at Queen's and beyond. It was easy to find a community at Queen's that recognized the importance of allyship on campus.
So I wrote somewhat disagree because while I was lucky enough to eventually find a community that emphasized and valued the inclusion and diversity that I was looking for, it was definitely a journey. It didn't happen immediately. In fact, I would say that could only confidently say that I was part of a community like that maybe third year. I'm now in my fourth year.
For me, it took, I think, until my third year as well to really find spaces and feel comfortable going into them where I felt supported. I found that when I first stepped foot on campus, not a lot of folks were open and honest about these types of conversations of like creating inclusive spaces. I found that sometimes there was this like siloed feeling to, at least even in my program, where only certain folks, and I put that in like air quotes, only certain folks would engage in talks about inclusion and creating like welcoming spaces, whereas for everyone else, it felt like, what are you talking about? Queens is a great place to be. And for those who weren't feeling that it was, often it was like an isolating feeling.
So I'm born and raised in Calgary, in Alberta, but my parents were both immigrants from Iraq. And, growing up in Canada, my family is pretty in tune with like our culture, but from a young age, there was almost that sense of like internalized, I need to fit in, and that internalized, like I need to be more white, like just to be blunt. And it has stuck with me to this day to some degree. I think I've gotten a more recognition of my internalized, honestly, like internalized racism, to be honest. Like I've gotten like, I think I've become a bit more aware of it. But because of that, because of the way I've grown up, when I first came to Queens, it almost seemed easier for me to find that community because I've like grown up and I've like basically pushed myself into a bit of a shell to kind of fit the mold of like the popular culture. But now I've been working with the student experience office, or I've been like, and like honestly, like I've grown up, so like talking with my parents more and like having those conversations where I'm starting to like acknowledge that a bit more.
I wrote somewhat agree because before I came to Canada, I have like no idea about like equity, inclusivity, and I'm so happy like I can join all this program and are working for the Human Rights and Equity Office. But I put on somewhat because it also take me like several years here to know about all these things and learning more about this, but I'm still happy like I can be the part of it. Yes. Hi, my name is Wanda. My pronouns are they, she. I'm in 5th year LLCU major, Languages, Literatures, and Cultures. I'm an international student from China. I'm working as a peer facilitator for both Positive Space program and the Gender-Based Violence Awareness and Bystander Intervention program. I'm watching right now, I would say RuPaul's Drag Race Season 16 and the Queer Eyes Season 8. I think it helps to promote a culture of inclusivity on campus, also empower the individuals to understand and address systemic issues, helping the campus to promoting a more supportive community.
You must be part of a marginalized group to understand the importance of activism. Okay, you can move.
So I said strongly disagree because I firmly believe that you don't need to be part of a community or to be marginalized to be able to listen to them and hear their struggles and want to work to improve it. You know, you'll even see it across people doing equity work and doing allyship work where, yes, they may be marginalized in one way, but they aren't in another, and they're working very hard for identities that they don't share to have space and making that space. Hi, my name is Abby. My pronouns are they, them. I'm in my 3rd year of Con Ed, and I'm a classics major. What I'm doing on campus is I am the Shift Project student lead, and I am one of the student co-leads for the Positive Space program. What I'm watching right now is I recently finished Percy Jackson. I think these conversations are important because I think it normalizes dialogue, conversation, and also normalizes having nuanced conversations.
I think to some degree, I would even say that folks who don't identify as marginalized or aren't marginalized have a responsibility to be advocates and to engage in equity work, because I think, again, like when we come back to the idea of the popular culture, I think it is that group of the population that has the power, right? And when you think about power and privilege, you know, I think it's one thing to kind of be, kind of be ignorant and kind of like be in that ignorant bliss versus using that power and privilege to kind of like disrupt and dismantle those systems of oppression for folks that do experience oppression.
I do think that experiences of oppression do kind of influence and create a lot of advocacy and a lot of movements, really. And it's that experience that gives you a different, deeper kind of understanding to the importance of certain things. So while I definitely do think that allyship is critical to change, I think that the experiences that different types of advocates, depending on their positionalities and experiences, can change.
From my perspective, your privilege can change depending on your location, depending on the people that you're surrounded by. Like, for instance, earlier, Zaid, you were mentioning that you grew up in, Alberta, and I know a couple of friends who grew up in the cities in Alberta, but then others who grew up in, towns that had a population of like 3,000. And for them, we may not initially see, like, for instance, a white guy who plays hockey as someone who's like, not necessarily privileged in our colonial Canadian context. But when you think about someone like that moving from a town of less than 3,000 people to a big city like Toronto, that is an example of, your privilege shifting relative to the space that you're in. So I think the reason I said strongly disagree is because throughout our lives, we're going to have so many different points where we're going to have more privilege and then sometimes less privilege. Even if you think about folks who live in coastal regions, maybe they have a gigantic house and everything is secure and safe for them. It takes one natural disaster to put them in a extremely vulnerable position, like being displaced. Hi everyone, my name is Meena. My pronouns are she, her, and I am in my 4th year of the commerce program. My advocacy work at Queen's is really focused on the Lead, Include, Transform program, where I am a facilitator and train students on campus on how to be inclusive leaders. A show that I'm watching right now is The Last of Us. It has me on an adrenaline rush pretty much every episode. For me, having these open conversations on campus is so important because it gives an opportunity for all of us to be able to learn from each other's stories. I think storytelling is a form of justice. Sometimes it's not even about the changes that we need to see happening. Sometimes it really is about finding people who understand and hold space and compassion for us to, be candid about how we're feeling being on campus. So that's why I think it's really important to have these conversations.
There are still times when I feel discomfort when presented with information that challenges my preconceived ideas.
I think I'm at a point in my activism where I understand that when I hear information that may make me feel uncomfortable because it pertains to a privilege that I've had that I didn't know that I had, I know that it's actually not about me. It's about a system, and that like I think when I was younger and when I was earlier in my activism, I used to treat like learning about my privilege like it was some kind of moral failing, and it's not that. It's an opportunity to make space for those who do experience oppression in a place where I don't. So I say somewhat agree, because there are still things that I hear sometimes where I'm like, whoa, I don't think that, or no, I've never done that, but I have been a part of it. But I'm a lot more comfortable with the idea of that now, because I look at it as a stepping stone to direct where I need to learn next.
One of the first things that I learned when I started to actively educate myself about activism and allyship is that the feeling of discomfort is necessary, and accepting and embracing and really unpacking that feeling of discomfort is something that like is just part of moving forward in activism and in allyship. And especially when you, for example, start thinking about safe spaces and how sometimes that term is used to kind of go against what a lot of our goals are in allyship and activism and inclusion. It's because people are so adamant about just keeping tied and connected to that feeling of comfort. It really is about challenging the comfort. My name's Andrea. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a fourth-year student in the psychology program. Some of the work that I've been doing on campus is most of the research in the psychology department. I've been looking at intersections of psychology and EDI. And what I'm currently watching right now is Avatar: The Last Airbender for maybe the 15th time. And I think that these conversations are important because creating this dialogue among students is probably the first step in creating change and something that we can all do.
When you're coming across new information and you're feeling that discomfort, it's a term that we call cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you're coming across new information and it's asking you to reflect on how does this new information fit into your understanding of the world. So in a way, you're having a bit of a paradigm shift. And I think I put a smiley face here because I love moments of cognitive dissonance that really make me think and go, I didn't consider this perspective before.
There is value in performative allyship.
Did this question make anyone else laugh? I think performative activism, the reason I say that I somewhat disagree with it being valuable is because I think there is just a tiny bit of value out of it, where if someone doesn't really care about a cause and isn't actually making any progress on supporting the work surrounding it, even just their performative pieces that are very public facing can sometimes trick others into thinking, oh, stuff is happening, I need to care about this too. So that public facing support that may not actually be, mirrored with support behind the scenes that's actually driving work forward, I think it can inspire others to take action. Although I can already anticipate a big flip side is that people think there's a false sense of progress. So people think more is happening, and that actually kind of sets us back.
That sense when you're just doing it to almost seem better in front of your peers, or to make it seem to your peers like you care about an issue when you don't actually care about that issue, to me, takes away from the folks that truly do care and are doing the work to move that issue forward. And I think in the grand scheme of things, I actually think it takes away from the work and the progress that is being made. Hello everyone, my name is Zaid Kassim. I use he, him pronouns, and I am in my second year of my master's degree in civil engineering. Right now I'm currently the student lead of development programs at the Student Experience Office, but I'm also the director of IEDIAA at the Vogue Charity Fashion Show. And throughout my time at Queen's in my undergraduate, I also served as the AMS president in my 5th year. Right now, I am watching Griselda, brand new, Sofia Vergara. Really cool that she's in a drama, so that's super fun. And I think these conversations surrounding advocacy are important to break down barriers about getting into advocacy. I think a lot of the time, I'd say the popular culture can seem hard getting into advocacy, but I'm a firm believer that everyone should be and can be an advocate. So having these conversations is one of those ways where we can start to dismantle those barriers.
Performative activism for a lot of people is the entrance to activism. It's the starting point for them. So, like, you know, a lot of like people joke about like the Canva girlies in high school when an event happens, but like that sharing usually for teens is what gets them thinking about an issue. And I also think, I mean, if somebody said like, what is, like, if you could like say an experience that is performative activism to a T, I would say it was like during like when BLM was gaining popularity and people did that post a black square. Did that do anything? No, that was so performative, but it built skills. It built, people were very collectively working together towards something. And I think that there's value in those skills being built in people, even if the result of what that, you know, the black square didn't do anything. Did it show solidarity? Maybe, but tangibly nothing happened. But I think it built skills towards, you know, potentially collectively working together for something more meaningful and more impactful.
I also think being performative is the starting point. It's just the start, but I put somewhat because it cannot just be performative. Yes.
Burnout is an inherent part of being a student activist or an activist generally. Okay.
So I did disagree with that prompt. And it's not to say that I don't think it's very common. That's why I didn't strongly disagree. I think it does definitely happen with a lot of students or just generally activists, because especially it's usually people who are marginalized that are the ones that end up doing that activism. The onus and the burden is on them, and that can be a lot while you're also experiencing oppression. But I do disagree because it shouldn't be inherent to it. I think that there is definitely a way to be an advocate and participate and engage in activism without actually experiencing all that burnout.
When I at least look, let's take it just from a Queen's level, Queen's University level, I just think we're not there yet. You know, I think that there's so many, again, the popular culture for a lot of these conversations and a lot of, let's say, challenges that marginalized folks experience aren't necessarily, either aren't received, or there's still a large population of folks that either don't care or aren't knowledgeable. And a lot of the time it can be really challenging when you're advocating for a certain issue or a group of issues or a group of people, and it not be received over and over and over again.
So for this one, in my head, I was thinking there's the answer that is grounded in what I've seen, and then there's the answer that I would like to give. So similar to what you both were talking about, ideally, I would love for all of us to be at the strongly disagree, but just based on what I've seen in my personal experiences, often the people who are doing advocacy work, whether it's on a campus or whether it's, you know, beyond campus spaces, they're typically the ones most deeply affected by an issue. And so just taking that into account, the urgency of that cause is much greater in your own mind when it's deeply affecting you than it is in someone who's sitting at the other end of a table that has, you know, decision-making power, whether it's over budgets, whether it's over certain policies or practices in a space. So obviously that alone, for instance, just that alone of like going into a meeting and being at the opposite end of a table for someone who you have to convince to see your humanity, that's exhausting. So sometimes people think that activism can be burnout because of how long you've been engaged in it, or sometimes because of how, you know, pressing the cause is. But I think, honestly, more than half of the burnout I've experienced or that I've seen other people experience often comes from sitting in spaces where you are spending time explaining something to someone that you really wish you didn't have to explain. Like, I remember thinking to myself often that, you know, at the end of the day, this meeting for you, you're going to walk away and you'll be able to go into a grocery store and buy whatever you need and walk out of it and still go on with your day. Meanwhile, at the height of the pandemic, I go into a grocery store, I'm wearing a mask, and there's been instances where I was called really Islamophobic slurs, and I thought, this cause does not affect you the same way it affects me. For you, it's a let's table this until tomorrow. But for me, it's this. After this meeting, I step out and it is going to affect me. So the choice to walk away kind of impacts the level of burnout that you'll experience, because when you're affected by a cause, especially in a visible way, it's really, really hard to separate yourself from the advocacy work that you're doing. I can't turn off the fact that, I'm a Muslim woman or that I'm racialized when I walk away from an advocacy event or initiative or meeting or, protest or rally or whatever. So that definitely contributes to, I think, why I said that, the burnout is a bit inherent.
Meena actually said something that made me think about another thing that comes with the burnout of activism, is that when you're the one, especially like if you're always the one calling things out and going, this is an issue, this isn't inclusive, this isn't accessible, you're sort of seen as a hater. Like, you're seen as the problem, even though the problem is that the space isn't inclusive or that there's an issue in how things are being run, because, in an ideal world, everyone is in on these conversations and everyone is calling this out, but everyone's at different points in their learning, and usually it is just one person or two people or a small group who are advocating for that change. And a lot of the time the response isn't like, oh yes, we'll go change that right now. It's, you're annoying, stop bringing it up, it's not a problem, hasn't been a problem till now. And I think that also can greatly contribute to the burnout, is just people sort of seeing you as a bad person, or just the sort of being seen as a hater when really you're trying to improve the space.
To learn more about the Shift Project and Youth for Consent Culture, visit us on Instagram at Queen's Shift Project and Youth for Consent Culture. Watch more Shift shorts like this one on the Queen's Shift Project YouTube channel.